Lynn, thank you so much for joining us on the Starting Over podcast. You are such a powerhouse woman, and it is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Shannon.
So, where I wanted to start actually was with a common saying that we have, which is mind over matter. And it's often a saying that's used to inspire people to overcome obstacles or adversity. But interestingly, much of your work over the years has been giving a scientific explanation to that. And I wondered if we could start there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's do that.
So, what is mind over matter? Is it that grit and determination and having an idea, a thought, and a will to make something happen? Does that influence reality?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I teach my students about the power of intention is that you have to have a very focused thought. And, we think of intention as being a little bit like meditation. You sit back and you relax a little bit, and some thoughts come and the universe hears it. But in my experience of experimenting, not only studying intention with intention masters and scientists who were doing mind over matter studies, that those have been the subject of two of my books, three actually. But I've also looked at what has happened with intention masters, master healers, Buddhist monks, Qigong masters, and they all have a very, very focused intention, a very focused thought. And that has been demonstrated in the 41 intention experiments I've run to date with scientists around the world. The more specific the intention, the better it works. When we sent love to water, it didn't work. When we sent an intention to change the pH of water, it worked. So that kind of great specificity is really important. And it's not just a relaxed feeling, as I say, like meditation is. When we've done brainwave studies on people doing intention, particularly intention in a group, they very quickly go into a very different brain state than meditation. Instead of certain parts of the brain turning on, certain parts of the brain in group intention turn off. And we become a focused kind of hyper mind. But I also think, aside from the power of intention, there's no question, the science is clear about it. Thoughts are trespassers. They're things that affect other things. And I've seen that and demonstrated that with intention experiments. We've done everything from making seeds grow faster to purifying water to lowering violence in war-torn areas to healing someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And of those 41 experiments, 37 have shown positive, significant effects in most cases. And the 4 that didn't work had a lot to do with just the setup of the experiment. Mm-hmm. And in one case, not being specific enough. But I think there's also another feeling to mind over matter too, which is grit, Shannon. I think what I've seen in my life is the huge importance of not giving up. I tell my students, never give up. Never give up. Just focus on it, keep working at it, keep doing the things that will lead you to it, but don't give up. And if you see highly successful people, invariably, they did not give up. So I think that's another really important point.
Yeah, I agree. If I look at the common denominator, even from an anecdotal, not scientific perspective of people in my life or around me that have been successful, it's those that apply grit, determination, and consistency to achieve their goals. And like you say, it is being focused and knowing what you want, which I think is a problem for many people who don't exactly know what they want or don't know if they want something badly enough to make it happen.
No, they just know, I don't want this, but they're not sure what they want. For instance, a lot of people in many of my master classes for intention will say things like, I want to be rich. And I will say, oh, okay, you need $3 million or 20 billion or whatever it is. And they say, well, no, I really need $24,000 to buy a new car, for instance. Well, I'll say, well, then intend for that. And when I drill down a little bit more, it's not that they want to be rich in the sense of having lots more stuff and property and all of those accoutrements. What they want is a different job, for instance, or not to work so hard. They want more time to pursue a hobby or to be with their children or grandchildren or anything else than what they're doing right now. But they don't necessarily want to be rich. They just think that's going to be a vehicle that's going to make them happy. And so invariably drilling down, they don't know what they want. They just know they don't want this. So one of the things I do is try to help them come up with what exactly they want and then to show them how to intend for it, particularly in a group.
Interesting. So I want to break this down because when you talk about this miraculous power that we have, this power of intention, do we need to focus our attention on what we want or what we don't want? Is there a negative consequence, perhaps, to overly focusing on what we don't want to happen?
Well, a lot of people ask me this. For instance, let's take cancer. Anybody who has cancer doesn't want it, and they want to be rid of it. So a lot of people say to me, oh, you can't mention the C word because if you do, you're going to bring more of it. That's not true. It's all in how you frame it. If I've had many, many people heal from stage 4 cancer using the techniques that we teach. A woman last year in our retreat had stage 4 cancer, was very, very weak. She came with her son. They weren't even going to come because she'd been diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma after they'd signed up for this retreat. I encouraged them to come, saying, I think it will be good for her, not knowing if it will heal her or not, but it would be good for her, being surrounded by other people, doing intention for her, loving intention, etc. So they did. The first night, they did this very deep power beat group. I do intention in small and large groups. That's the real centerpiece of my work. And she said, and the whole group said, it was so powerful. She came out of that session saying, I am healed. And everybody thought, well, that's nice. That'll be nice. And she had much more energy for the rest of the week, went home, went through scans a few months later, and without chemo, without radiotherapy, she had some nutritional therapy, but that was it. With totally disseminated melanoma, it was healed. They could not find a trace of cancer in her body. And I have a lot of cases like this of 1 10-minute session being that powerful. So the bottom line, you asked me that thing about negativity. They all said, our intention is that Esther is free of cancer or healed of cancer. So they framed it positively. They're saying what they want. They want her to be healed of this thing. And it's okay to say that because you've framed it positively. But that is a big, big urban myth, as is the idea that you can't be specific because it'll prevent the universe from giving you something more. But I have found when you are very specific and focused about a goal, it doesn't get limited. The universe may give you more. In our intention experiments, we did an intention to lower violence in St. Louis, Missouri, one area of St. Louis, by 10%. It came down by 43% compared to all the surrounding areas. So the universe doesn't limit it, but you need a particular focus.
And just for people who might be listening going, hold on a second, this sounds unbelievable to me that what people can sit in a group and focus their attention and all of a sudden people can go into remission or violence in a certain city can diminish by over 40%. Like how is it that that could have such an effect with just thought? Because it sounds like, to play devil's advocate here, a lot of the quick fix, miracle healing things that people often sell. And I imagine there's a lot of skepticism around it.
Well, there was a lot of skepticism in me. I have a background as an investigative reporter. And the last thing I thought I would be doing is talking about miraculous healings or miraculous anything. I discovered this by accident. I was interested in testing the power of intention after doing one book about the new science called The Field. And that really set me on this journey. But there was a lot of unfinished business. After I'd written about a lot of aspects of it, there were lots of studies and lots of scientists working on mind over matter studies. So the skeptic in me said, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, shifting a quantum particle, something very, very subtle, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And that's why I set up the intention experiment, because by then I knew a lot of scientists and I also had a lot of readers. The field was in 30 languages by then. So I thought, well, if I just put them together, I'll have one of the biggest global laboratories in the world. And I could ask my readers every so often to come on my website or some other platform and send an intention to some target set up by one of the scientists in one of the prestigious universities that I knew by then. So we started doing that in 2007. And as I mentioned, we've done everything from trying to make seeds grow faster to lowering violence in war-torn areas to purifying water to healing people of things like post-traumatic stress disorder. And we've seen over and over again, and with different scientists. I was really clear that I wanted to use different scientists so I couldn't be accused of bias. But I was blown away by it because I didn't think it was going to work.
Yes.
No, there was that. But then with the small groups, I started doing that in 2008, just to try to bring what I was seeing with these intention experiments to a workshop. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. So I was kicking it around with my team and my husband at the time. And I said, my husband is still he's still my husband. I meant I was speaking to him at the time. And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll put people in groups and have them send intention to someone in the group with a health challenge. I wasn't really sure how I was going to shrink this down to a workshop. And he is a journalist also and a very good headline writer. So he said, I love it, the power of 8. And that is how we got the name. Literally that. And when we first did it in this first workshop in Chicago, I didn't expect it was going to work. I thought it was going to be a nice little feel-good effect, like getting your back rubbed and, or getting a facial. So we had people get into groups, send an intention to someone with a health challenge. And the next day, the second day of the workshop, we had them come back and we gave each of the people who had been a recipient of this intention a mic. And we thought it was going to be, I felt relaxed. And it wasn't anything like that. What it was a woman who had been limping all weekend from very bad knee arthritis said, I walk normally today. And someone else said, I have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and my gut's normal. And somebody else, and there were loads of them, but somebody else said, I have cataracts and I'm 80% better. So this disturbed me. I did not like this because, as I said, I started out life with busting baby selling rings, put with hidden tape recorders. I was putting bad guys in jail. That was my job, I thought. And so this was as far away from it as anything I could think of. But I had to keep trying to understand it. So I kept doing it in workshops. But it took me a whole 10 years, Shannon, to get up the courage to finally write up a book about it. which I published in basically the beginning of 2018, because I kept saying, I need to understand more about this. Why is this working? Why are we seeing all of this? And
Why courage? Were you afraid of something?
yeah, I was afraid of being discredited because of it. I'm a really serious journalist at heart. My books, typically, I write them in a way that I believe is very simple for lay people to understand, but they typically have about 400 scientific references way back there for anybody who wants it.
Oh, they're
And
very empirical, very scientific. Largely.
yeah, and that's really important to me, is to make sure that this stuff is evidence-based, and that I'm trying to bring science to spirituality and to show there is evidence for all of this. So the idea that I'm there waving a magic wand and people are getting up out of their wheelchairs was very frightening to me. But I looked into it a lot further. And by the way, 2 people have got out of their wheelchairs after 10-minute intentions. One woman, paralyzed from the neck down with some idiopathic paralysis, got up. I've got it on video. Somebody else had multiple sclerosis, pushed away her wheelchair. I've got that on video too, and much, much more. So I've seen, thousands of healings now and thousands of improvements in lives. Everything from financial to new and exciting careers, to healing relationships or creating new ones, to having a new life purpose. And I understood, after I started writing the book, I started trying to look into, why does this work? And there is the power of intention, no question. No question. There's so much evidence for that, but that's only one part of it.
Yeah. I guess it crossed your mind naturally about placebo effect, or people not being honest in their accounts, or did you account for all of that?
Oh, yeah. That was the first thought I had with that first Chicago workshop. Oh, this is just a placebo effect. If it is, bring it on. If you can get people out of their wheelchair with a placebo effect, great. But there's much more than that. And we did some studies to try to find out why. There is also what happens in groups. Groups have what the psychologist Emil Durkheim said were collective effervescence. We get all psyched up in a group. And that's one reason. Another big piece of this is altruism. I started studying the science of altruism because I wondered, with a Power of 8 group, there's 8 or so people in the group. 7/8 of the time, you're doing intention for somebody else's life healing. And I started wondering whether that had anything to do with it. And I looked into the science of altruism. And honestly, altruism is like a bulletproof vest. It's not just a nice thing to do and a feel-good thing to do. It's an essential thing to do. People who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. The science is really clear about that. If you have an illness and you help somebody else with the illness, you're far more likely to be healed.
Quick pause. If you're a regular listener to the show and you have found value in these episodes, I would be immensely grateful if you pledged your support. Reality is, podcasting is not a free venture. There are many behind the scenes costs. But with your support, you'll be able to help me fuel the growth of this podcast and keep bringing you bigger and better guests each and every week. And of course, the signature honesty and real talk, which I'm known for. So if you'd like to say thanks and support the show for less than a cup of coffee per week, you can click the link called Patreon in the show notes. Thanks so much in advance, guys. Back to the episode.
There is also the community effect. Communities, small, tight-knit communities, are healing. People who have certain genetic illnesses or propensities to have that illness. Like there was one study of depression, and they looked at 2 groups of people who had the depression gene, so to speak, and they hadn't expressed it yet. And one group were in the Philippines and the other group were in America. in America. And the Americans had a far later depression gene than the Filipinos. And nevertheless, the Filipinos were far less likely to get depressed because of the way they live. They live with a big extended family. They have close knit community ties compared to the go-ahead isolated Americans who don't, who are more isolated than ever before. So I looked at all of that and started realizing these communities, and what I tend to do is I put people into Power of Eight groups in my courses and have them meet, particularly in my master class, for a whole year, week after week after week, just an hour a week. And that creates a totally new tribe that almost invariably creates an intention family. These are people who have your back, who you haven't even known before. You didn't go to school with them. You didn't have children with them. And yet they're intending for you. They're doing a secular form of prayer for you. That is extraordinarily healing. And doing it back is extraordinarily healing. But there is one other piece I came to. Now, I mentioned about brainwave studies. Mm-hmm. We've done a load of brainwave studies with Life University, which is one of the largest chiropractic universities in the US. And we expected, when we put an EEG cap on one member of the 7 groups we'd organized, Power of 8 groups, with student volunteers who had never even meditated before, hadn't done Power of 8 groups before. These were total novices. We expected that the brainwave signatures that we would observe once they have this EEG cap on, which measures brainwaves, that these would look just like meditation, just like those of meditation. And they look nothing like those of meditation. Meditation causes essentially an increase in alpha waves. That is the slower brain waves that are like light dreaming, and an increase in certain brain waves. In ours, these brain waves were diminishing. They were turning off, particularly the parts of the brain that sit toward the back of the head. They're called the parietal lobes, and they help us navigate through space. They tell us this is me, this is not me. They were dialed way down. And so were parts of the right frontal lobes involved with worry, doubt, negativity. They were also dialed way down. And so these were people essentially in a state of oneness. And in ecstatic oneness, their brainwave signatures were almost identical to those recorded by the University of Pennsylvania on Sufi masters going through chanting, or Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer. These were people in a state of ecstatic oneness. And that's where I think this is all happening. Because we don't get to feel like we're one. We all say, oh, we're all one. You know, it's the thing people say most of the time. But we don't experience life like that. We don't experience life like that. We experience life in separation, in competitive separateness. And so there's a time where you don't, where you experience the way life's supposed to be. And I think that may be part of that path to healing. That's been my conclusion.
I'm curious, what has been, over your very long career, a piece of research that really left you dumbfounded? Was there something where you were like, wow, I did not see that coming?
Oh, golly. I mean, there's so much, Shannon, that I didn't see coming. I mean, the whole field, you know, I didn't expect what I found when I researched my first book in this area called The Field. I thought there would be something like human energy fields. I was interested in why things like spiritual healing work. How come you can have a thought, send it to someone else, and make them better? That seemed to undermine everything we know about how the world works. So what I didn't expect, I expected to find human energy fields. And I persuaded my publisher to let me do this book based on a proposal that has nothing to do with the final reality, because when I actually started researching it, I found all of these scientists discovering what compounded into a completely new science, a completely new view of the world. And when you asked me before, how come this works? Why does thoughts affect things? You have to get what these scientists were all saying is this solid and stable world we see around us isn't solid and stable at all. It's a vibrating batch of packets of energy, and our thoughts are energy too. So if we suddenly understand that even the sticks and stones world we live in is just vibrating energy, and we're trading energy back and forth all the time, and our thoughts traverse outside our skulls and also they are energy and they can affect people and things, as demonstrated in loads of scientific studies. They're all in my book, The Intention Experiment. Then all of that starts to make sense.
Hmm. You know, something that you wrote, I think, in one of your books was maybe it was The Field, where in your intro, where you said for you it was difficult in a way because of being this investigative journalist, always very empirical, very scientifically grounded, and you begrudged the fluffier end of New Age spirituality, you called it. But reading your work and hearing what you're describing here, obviously you bring so much more depth than a lot of the people in this space that talk about manifestation and the law of attraction. But there does seem to be a link there. Is that
Oh,
correct?
oh, sure. Look, it all depends on how we define woo-woo, right? If we say it's fluffy and there's no evidence to it, okay, that's one thing. But what I was trying to do, at the time when I decided to do the intention experiment, all of that was coming to the fore, the whole idea of the law of attraction, manifestation, etc. And there was a part of me that didn't like any of that. I thought, well,
Mm-hmm.
there's no evidence for any of this. How far can we take this? Why are they talking about that with absolutely no evidence of it? And so I felt, as I said, let's quantify it. Let's see how far we can go. Can I fly with my thoughts? Can I stop a train with my thoughts? How far can we take this? And
Good
that's why I
question.
set up the intention experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And what blew me away were my own studies, to be honest, because I really didn't think it was going to work very well. I thought it would be interesting, but we'd have very mild results, not the results we got. And I also really didn't expect the effects on the people themselves. That's been the biggest mind blower, is the whole mirror effect of intention. I've been surveying people.
What is that? Just to break that down, the mirror
Sure.
effect.
I've been surveying people since I started doing the intention experiments in 2007. I started the surveys in 2008, saying basically, were you able to get onto my website? At first I was just asking, were you able to participate and how was it for you? And a few other things like that. And I was astonished to get back answers like this. I was crying uncontrollably. I had goosebumps up and down my arms. I felt enormous heat and energy and things like that. And by the way, people participating were participating the way I'm participating with you today. I'm sitting in front of my computer screen alone. These thousands of people who were participating in these experiments were sitting in front of their computer screens alone. Yet they were having this extraordinary physical effect. But then, and I usually wait some weeks before sending surveys out, they were saying things like, I'm getting along so much better with my husband or my boss or my coworkers. My estranged children suddenly phoned me up out of nowhere. And this isn't just one or two. This is thousands of people writing this stuff back. Also, I am about 50% say I am more in love with everybody I come in contact with. I am less triggered by people who have opinions different from mine. And that went on and on and on. And also, about a third of people routinely report being improved in some physical challenge or completely healed. So this happens over and over and over again. We've just done 3 intention experiments for Israel and Gaza. And we've had 30,000 people participate in all, and the same kinds of answers back again and again and again. So to me, it's almost like the target didn't matter. What was happening was all kinds of healing in the act of participating in what is essentially an altruistic form of prayer. And so that was the thing that I think probably blew my mind the most.
Yeah. I live near a Tibetan monastery, and with all of this conflict in Russia and the Ukraine, they would always meet every morning and effectively do what you're saying in terms of the intention experiment of all of them collectively directing their thoughts towards an improvement in this way. And I was skeptical of it. This was actually before I had read your book, and I said, oh, surely that's nice, but that's like saying, pray for somebody who has cancer but still take the drugs, like, the kind of idea of what, like, is this possible? Does this have a tangible effect? So naturally, when I'm reading your experiments, I'm blown away. In fact, like, it challenges the whole concept, everything that even what I was taught in school about the nature of the universe, how things work, what our place is in the world. And this is just so mind expanding.
It is. And what we have to do is go back and understand that our concept of the world is more than 300 years old. It was essentially devised and explained by Isaac Newton, who talked about a very well-behaved universe of separate things. And we are just another one of those things. And that also was augmented by the work of Charles Darwin, who believed, he was very influenced by population explosion theories of the time, and believed that life must proceed through struggle. So he believed there just ain't enough out there, so you better damn well get there first. So those 2 concepts have really informed what we think about the world and have created essentially competitive individualism.
Yes.
But we are very different from that. And the quantum scientists who started discovering what is happening in the subatomic world, the world of the tiny, discovered something very different. They've discovered a very different science, a very different view of the world. And we're only now discovering that those rules of the tiny are also the rules of the large. So we have to abandon our old views of science and our place in the world and how we operate, and embrace this new science. I call it new, but a lot of it is 100 years old.
Yes, and that's why you mention a lot of the ancient wisdom and traditions, spiritual traditions that, and now actually merging a lot with the science. People see them as 2 different fields, right? But actually there's a merge or a convergence.
Absolutely, a conversion, and that, I guess, is where my work sits.
Yes, and I guess this really links to what you say about our thoughts are not our brain. And you really like to distinguish between that, because we often think that, that's just something that is emanated from our brain. But you say that there's astonishing evidence that our consciousness is out there rather than inside our head. And that is why our thoughts have such power.
That is where there's no question that, and many, many scientists concur with this, that our thoughts are not just locked inside our skull. And there is some very good evidence that consciousness may lay outside in the field. The evidence demonstrated by Dr. Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist who did studies on rats and showed you could remove most of their brains after teaching them a complex maze, and it might affect their physical, capability. They might stagger around, but they would always remember the run. He and another scientist were very frustrated by this because they realized there's no place in the brain that houses memory. And they found not only that, but many other aspects make you challenge consciousness being inside the brain. Near-death experiences. Now there are more and more scientific studies where they've actually had EEG machines, recording brainwaves of people who actually died unbeknownst to them. And the recording carried on for about an hour or two, and they saw in a brain that was supposedly, if it was a computer unplugged. They saw there was still brain activity then. And concurring exactly with what near-death experience people have experienced themselves. And there's all kinds of information about near-death experience people demonstrating a complete awareness of everything that was going on in their hospital bed and hospital room when they were supposedly clinically dead. So there is all of this and other evidence suggesting that our consciousness lies outside the brain. And I think there are many reasons why intention works, many of them. But I like to just say that thoughts are trespassers, and they can go out and affect other people and things. And as I say, I wrote a whole book about it in the intention experiment, saying, okay, guys, here's the evidence for thoughts are things that affect other things. And there's no question about it.
So do you think then that, because a lot of people will say, but, I have a lot of automatic negative thoughts. I don't feel in control of this. They're things that seem to just happen. What do you say to that? In this whole space of the negativity, the fear, the doubt, the excessive rumination that keeps people stuck, and perhaps even what leads people to podcasts like this, talking about starting over or finding a new path, people drawn also to your work equally.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I work with people to help them get over that negativity and to identify what they are thinking unbeknownst to them. One of the activities that I do particularly on my year-long course, my biggest course is the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, where I teach people in live and interactive sessions on Zoom for 6 successive meetings on a Saturday. And then I put people into groups. Our team put people into groups. We named them after Beatles songs. We needed lots of groups.
Who came up with that? Is that the theme of love?
I like the Beatles. I love the Beatles. And we like to name them. They're nice, happy, positive songs. You betcha. So we name them after Beatles songs and put people into groups, and they meet for a whole year. Two of the things that I do in my sessions with them and with the clinics I run all through the year too. So I'm working with them for a whole year. One of the things I do is have them identify and become conscious of what they're thinking all the time. And we have special exercises where they become conscious of that. And they're horrified. About 80% of what they're thinking is negative and judgmental, particularly about themselves. And there are many ways to protect yourself from negativity, your own and others. Usually it is also coming from the belief, I'm not good enough, I can't. And one of the wonderful things about your podcast is the whole idea of starting over, and I can totally relate to that because I can think of many times in my life where I've started over. I mean, marriage. I got divorced when I was 33. I just married Mr. Wrong, and it wasn't, it was not meant to be. And I thought, oh my God, here I am in a foreign country in the UK. I don't know very many people. I've just made a big error with this one. that our marriage only lasted about 3 years. And I've given up my life in New York. And what am I going to do now? And lo and behold, within a year, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have met my wonderful husband of 33 years. So, I can relate to that. And I can also relate to starting over work-wise. I mean, my first book, The Field, that it's not my first book. That was my fourth book. But that book got written when I was 50. It got published when I was 50. So in a sense, I really started that new career with science and spirituality at 50. And, I can think of all kinds of things, having my children late. I had 2 daughters now grown, who were lights in my life. And, I had them late in life. So all of those things I can really relate to. It's not over, and it's never over until they put you in a box. And we now have evidence that it's not over then.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That I love these stories because it also, I think, it just instills such hope, I think. And also to realize that there is no normal path. We're often taught that or sold that idea, and it can be really jarring for people who find themselves in situations that are challenging or that are unexpected in some way. And here, you know what? Actually, things can turn out even better than you expected.
I think that almost every stumble in the road, I wrote this for Thanksgiving in my blog, how I love bumps in the road, because in my life, I've lived a long enough life to be able to have a rear view mirror. And in my life, I've now recognized that every stumble, every single bump in the road led to something better. It was put in my path, I think, so that I would learn and it would be better and something would be better. And that is truly been the case. And sometimes you do have to double down and say, okay, I made a mistake there with that person, with that job, with that career, with that house, whatever it is. And say, okay, there's still time to change this, to make this better, whatever it is. And I think there is another interesting part of this too, Shannon, which is I've noticed I'm the tail end of a baby boomer, and I've noticed baby boomers aren't giving up. It's really interesting. I mean, they're all hitting their 70s and 80s, and they keep going. They keep running for president, running for Congress.
True.
They keep getting out there and rocking. I mean, look at Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, Rod Stewart, Bob Dylan. They're all so old, and yet they're just out there rocking. I think it's a generation that just doesn't want to hang up its hat yet. And I love that about that, because I think one should always have a sense of a new challenge. I'm thinking now about, okay, I haven't tried this yet. I think I'll try doing this in writing, or doing that in writing, or doing this or that. And I just feel like, well, there's still lots of time to do lots of things. So I hope that many of your younger audience members will think about there's still loads of time to fit it all in.
Yes. You're brilliant, Lynne. I think you're giving me a dose of energy right now that I'm like, yes. Looking at it's an optimistic outlook as well. It really is, like the mindset of it all and the way in which we approach life. And like you say, the bumps in the road, that you can look at that as something to learn from, an invitation to redirect potentially.
Mm-hmm. It is an invitation to redirect. That's a lovely way of putting it. Absolutely. And just saying, okay, So that happened. Now, what do I need to do now? And it's just, as I said, when we talked about it in the beginning, never giving up. That's such a key element. And I see it in my master class with, I've now worked with thousands of people, and I see many of them who were feeling so hopeless, really understanding that they can redirect and that incredible things can happen from that. I do think a big part of this, though, I really do, is a big part of this is community. When you have this little group that are there for you, encouraging you, that you have to make a vow in front of. And that's what a lot of mine say. Well, I told them all I was going to do this, so I had to do it.
Accountability. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
huge.
I have a lot of people who always wanted to write that book, and they did. And they finally, even journalists who said, I was always going to write that book. I promised myself for 12 years and I didn't, and they finally do. And I see many people willing to take a risk because they've got their group behind them. I had this one woman, I love this story. She wanted to find a new relationship, and she wasn't that young. And she does this intention with her group. And within about 2 weeks, she gets a call out of nowhere from this boyfriend of hers of 35 years ago. 35 years ago. And they start connecting again. She's in Australia. He is in the UK. And they start connecting and talking. And it's also during COVID, during lockdown. And he finally, they get really close, and he finally makes the plunge and goes to Australia, goes through quarantine, and they're now living together. And it's, it just was this giant leap of faith. And she's so happy now. But I see that she wouldn't have done this by herself. She needed that group.
Yeah. It's probably a great buffer to our tendencies to withdraw or self-sabotage in those moments where we do have those fears, the doubts, the worries, the negativity that can often be very consuming for people and keep us limited.
Oh yeah. And I've had many people, another person, Marianne, she was working in this soulless job as a lab technician in the very top of Canada. So it was practically in Alaska, and she's very isolated. And when she first came to the class, and she also came to a retreat of mine, she was speaking in a whisper. And by the end of the class and everything, she was driving a motorcycle, a purple motorcycle. And she'd quit her job. She became a therapist, and she completely changed her job. And it was really the courage of that group that gave her the courage too, and gave her a chance to find her voice. I found that with other people too. Oftentimes, they feel like no one's listening, and they don't deserve to be heard. And when they're in the group, something about the group, because everybody's got to have a turn, they then ask, okay, so what do you want? And they recognize, oh, I have the right to ask for something too. And it's such a beautiful transition to see them get the courage. A guy in my class, in master class, Jerry, I love this story too. Jerry joined during lockdown again. And at the end of the year, he joined the master class again. And I said, Jerry, why? And he said, I just wanted more. I wanted more. I've had more compassion and love than I've ever had in my life, and I want more. And so he had his second group, and he said at the end of that one, I now know what love is. And I think that is another big aspect of this group effect. When you've asked me, why does this create miracles? And, we all have the capacity to heal. We truly do, all of us. Our bodies are designed to do that, and we are designed to be successful in our lives. But so much sabotages us along the way. But when we experience real unconditional love from a group of people
Mm.
who are strangers, that is, extraordinarily healing.
Yeah. So powerful. That's amazing to hear those stories as well. What beautiful work you're doing. Before we finish up, I want to come to just an idea about the importance of taking action because I mean, in some respects, we could say that this intention it is an action that we're doing. But a lot of people will say, okay, with this idea of the law of attraction and so on, that it's quite passive. And I'm wondering at what point there is having a focused intention to loop back to where we started of knowing what we want, directing our thoughts, our energy towards that, and the interplay between taking action and not giving up.
Oh, goodness. It's one of my 13 keys to intention mastery. You don't just think about it, you get off your butt and you start doing it. And you start creating it. You start wearing the clothes, acting the part, doing it, putting posters up, getting business cards done. You have to do the action too. There's no question about it. People think, well, I'll just sit and I'll just think about it and it'll come to me. You have to, yeah, you have to play an active role in that. I mean, it's why I think Patty from my group, one of my master classes, said it was really important for her to make a vow to her group that she was going to do X and Y. I think the intention was powerful, extraordinarily powerful, because her group intended for her to find the source of chronic fatigue. She was totally debilitated. If she walked her dog for 10 minutes, she'd have to lie in bed for another couple of hours. So she needed to find out why. So the intention to find out what was the cause mobilized her to look further afield. And she got this idea, maybe I should just check for mold. And lo and behold, it was. Her dressing room was filled behind it with black mold. And as soon as that was cleared out, her chronic fatigue, she was back to hiking and, lifting weights. So her
Wow.
chronic fatigue disappeared. So that was a combo. And I saw that with Mitchell Dean, who had suicidal depression, a clinical psychologist he was. So it was a bad look for a psychologist to be depressed. But again, he had his group intend to find the cause. And he started himself thinking about it and just got this hit. Maybe I should go to a Chinese herbalist. And he did. And the herbalist said, let's test your liver filtration systems. They did. And lo and behold, one of them wasn't working. And it turned out to be the cause of the depression. So again, it got solved. So those are just a few of the examples of got to follow up on things too.
And also, I'm picking out of that the element of intuition. We haven't spoken about that, but I would like it if you could speak to that even from a scientific perspective.
Well, we have to understand that we have capacities that have been demonstrated in science overwhelmingly, and I wrote about a lot of them in the field, that we have the ability to pick up information beyond our senses, whether in remote viewing or ESP or precognition, which is what you're talking about, meaning, ESP, to pick up information before it happens. We
What is
have that
ESP?
capacity, just as we have the capacity with intention. There's no question about it. The science is really clear about it. And you need to learn to tune in. So some of the other aspects of what I teach are tuning into your intuitive senses, tuning into other people's intentions. We do a whole class on that, and picking up this information. So there's a number of things going on here. There is the intuition. There's also the intention bringing about the intuition, which I believe happens essentially. That
Can you
these
break
are
that
people.
down? The intention brings about
sure,
the
the group
intuition.
is intended for you to pick, find, or perceive the cause of your chronic fatigue, let's say. And suddenly you get this feeling out of nowhere. Oh, I think I should go to a Chinese herbalist. And that's what I'm talking about. Something
Okay.
never would have occurred to you before. And I see that over and over and over again.
Powerful. Wow. I'm going to move into the final fast few questions now, Lynn. And the first thing I wanted to ask is, what is something that you have had to personally unlearn in your life?
I guess the biggest thing, and we've been talking about it, is to unlearn that you need empirical evidence for everything. And by that, I mean, well, scientific evidence for everything. Now, I've made all of my work has been about trying to scientifically prove things. But as I said in my book, The Power of Eight, I don't feel essentially I need to keep proving this over and over again. There is all of those things I said contribute to the power of group intention, but there's also an X factor there. And it is essentially about miracles that happen, the miracles of the everyday that maybe are beyond our understanding. But I see what happens, for instance, with people when they do an intention together. I did an intention experiment for Arabs and Israelis. And this was back in the beginning of the end of 2017, 2018. I had special equipment. I put cameras in conference rooms in 8 Arab cities. And the 9th camera was put in an audience of Israeli Jews. Now, I had to broker the whole thing. These are hated enemies. They refused to even talk to each other beforehand. But I convinced them all to take part in an intention experiment for Jerusalem to lower violence there. And both sides have a stake in that. So we did. And remember, I talked about the mirror effect before. Well, what was extraordinary is after this intention, because of this equipment, I could speak to any one of the conference rooms and auditoriums. They could speak to me, and all the rest of the people would hear as well. So I started asking people how it was for them. And the Arabs started sending love to the Jews. The Jews started crying and sending love to the Arabs. It was one big love fest. Again, I have this on video. It was amazing.
That's a good one.
And,
wow.
And I've seen that before in situations. We did an intention experiment for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Same thing happened where I had Arabs and Americans doing it together to lower violence in Afghanistan. And they were sending love back and forth. And I've seen this, and I have got to the point essentially of saying, you know what? Maybe the target doesn't matter so much. Maybe it's in the act of doing it. We create peace and love in the participants themselves. And if you start calculating how many people each one of them know and how they can affect all the people around them with this newfound love and peace, etc., you're starting to talk about massive ripple effects that can happen.
Exactly.
And maybe that's the whole point of the story.
Maybe that is the whole point. A beautiful, loving point. Yeah. What brilliant work. I'm so inspired by you, Lynn, honestly. I want to ask a final question, and that is for anyone listening who is starting over in some capacity, whether that's a new life challenge, a new chapter, end of a relationship, or maybe even just a new way of being in the world. What would you say to them in the context of really this power of intention?
Okay. Well, I say, first of all, don't ever give up, but also, and that it's not too late until they put you in a box. And even then, it's probably not too late. I'm wondering what's going to happen to me in heaven. And, are they going to give me a computer to work on too? But I'll give you a story. A few years ago, I had a health challenge. I got to the point, I was born with a hip dysplasia on both sides. And it's, it's all through my family. And I managed to override it for many, many years. I, did yoga and exercise and all of that. And all of a sudden, I stopped being able to walk very well, and it got worse and worse over the years. And it went on for about 3 or 4 years. And I tried everything alternative because I'm totally into all of that, 16 different therapies. And while it gave me a lot of material for a course, because I noticed that people really, the therapists were very good at what they did, but their thoughts and words weren't as good. So I thought of, oh, maybe I could help them with that. But I wasn't getting better. Here's what happened. I kept watching a thing called Strictly Come Dancing here, which is,
Oh, I used to love that.
a wonderful dance show.
I'm a dancer at heart. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And I would move my feet sitting on my sofa to them and keep saying to myself, I can do that. I'll do that one day. I'll do that one day. And I ended up having an operation, which totally fixed everything. I had to really work to get myself back walking again. And luckily it was lockdown, so I could walk and have nice walks we're not far from a big common here in the UK. So I had walks every day, but I kept in my mind all the time, I'm going to do dancing. I'm going to do dancing. I'm going to do ballroom dancing. And that was my big intention through the whole thing. I'm now back to HIIT classes and yoga and all kinds of things. And my husband promised me, okay, you walk again and we're going to do ballroom dancing. So I said, okay, you promised, we're doing it. So that's going to be my intention for this winter. So I think it's all about use it to imagine yourself being well, being accomplished, being whatever it is you want to, and just don't give up. And you may have to have 15 therapists, as I did, and finally found the 16th person. And the reason I went for that operation was I said to her, what can't I do after this? And she looked at me and went, this is a surgeon, well, skydiving maybe. And I went, yes. I thought of myself, everything. I thought of dancing and water skiing again and running and yoga and everything else. And maybe not skydiving, which is fine. I've never done it before.
You can take a pass on that one.
No, I could take a pass on that. And I thought, yes. And she had me at skydiving. Absolutely.
Wow. What a beautiful way to finish. I hope everyone listening, you are feeling as inspired as I am right now to really take the reins of your life and to realize the power that you have within you to make the changes you want to make. Lynne, where can people come and join you in your community, in your courses?
Thank you so much. They can come to lynnmctaggart.com. The intention experiments are always free. There's a lot of free things there, blogs, podcasts, and all kinds of things. And if you want to study with me, the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass is kicking off on February 17th. So just click on lynnmctaggart.com and join us.
Thank you so much, Lynne.
You're very welcome.